Educating for the Soul by Thomas More. An essay in holistic learning and spirituality in education. Breaking New Ground. Editors John P. Miller, Selia Karsaten, Diana Denton, Deborah Orr, and Isabella Colalillo Cates. Everything a human being does, including learning and teaching, is filtered through many layers of the imagination. Our childhood and our parents are always with us, setting the stage. The worldview of the society in which we live is always pressing. Our fears and our hopes, our fantasies of the future, all those things we feel as needs, this entire mass of images, soaked in emotions, profoundly influences how we imagine learning to take place and how we go about teaching and learning. And this world of imagination is largely unconscious, doing its work in the background as we develop our strategies and forge our theories on the surface of experience. A case could be made that the current focus on accountability and testing stems from anxiety, the fear that our students may not learn as much as they should, or that they may be given the wrong facts and the wrong ideas. I see two problems here. First, whenever we try to be creative out of anxiety, we are doomed to failure. Anxiety always has a place, but as the basic emotion shaping the thrust of our activity, it is a destructive starting point. Second, no matter how much testing we do, we will still get it wrong. It's the nature of learning to be a mixture of insight and dimness, facts and mistakes. We know all too well that what one generation takes to be the proven truth, a later generation transcends and revises. It might be better to incorporate ignorance into the design of teaching and learning. Before elaborating on that point, let me proclaim as clearly as possible that my concern is the soul. Our current focus on facts and science and skills highlights a certain dimension of human reality, but overlooks others. An emphasis on mind has generated a neglect of soul. The matter of soul is taken up today by the fringe writers who are generally outside the culture of academia and professionalism, digging in the murky swamps of self-help and popular psychology. I think we need to bring soul more into the center, where we can study it seriously and allow it to have an impact on the culture at large. But how do you educate the soul? And is that the proper way to formulate the issue? Do we cultivate the soul, or do we shape our ideas and practices so that soul is included? Let me phrase my concern as educating for the soul, teaching certain subjects and doing it in a way that brings the soul forward into our awareness and our list of priorities. What the soul needs and wants. As a starting point, we might realize that the soul is essentially different, though by no means disconnected from the mind and body. It has its own qualities which give rise to its own requirements. Because it's so mysterious, it is difficult to list those qualities without many caveats, but generally I feel comfortable saying that the soul is eternal, unique, contemplative, poetic, erotic, aesthetic, and transcendent. To lay out an approach to educating for the soul, all we would have to do is consider each of these elements and see how we might become more sophisticated in our knowledge and practice of them. Before going through the list, let me point out that eros is the dynamic of the soul. It works by desire, by want, need, and longing. It's easy to quickly pass by this important realization, but it is crucial. As my colleagues in archetypal psychology used to say, what does the soul want? That's the first question. Not what will improve it or make it excellent or help it to function, but what does it want? As a therapist, I saw over and over how people were brought to a recognition of their soul through desperate feelings of need, lack, and confusion. As a musician and artist, I know too that people can become keenly aware of soul in the process of their art and their longing for beauty and insight. If we understand Eros in its classical and mythological origins, we might appreciate that desire and need are aspects of the erotic dynamic of the soul. And if we are going to educate for the soul, then we have to give full attention to those strongly felt emotions and realizations. Eros, then, is not just a quality of the soul, but the very energy that sustains it and causes it to increase. Poetic vision and knowledge. We live in a quite literal-minded, fact-loving society, and so it's difficult to appreciate the soul's language and dialects. It is at home in poetic imagery and language, and that is not surprising given the soul's tendency towards mystery and multiple levels of meaning. A dream is a perfect example of soul speech. It usually connects strongly with the dreamer's daily life. It is full of obscure imagery, and it hints of a far broader collective and eternal issues. It demands a poetic sensitivity if we are to take any insight from it. But these are directions of the soul in everything it touches. Soul-centered education would emphasize the many dimensions of poetic existence. Poetry as such, literature and art, a poetic reading of science and nature, advocated and described by soul specialist Ralph Waldo Emerson, and a generally imagistic approach to all human interactions. We glimpse soul through insight rather than through direct analysis. We see it in reflection, implied, distorted, obscured, camouflaged. Soul is like poetry, as described by the American poet Wallace Stevens, like a pheasant disappearing behind a bush. So let us try to resist the temptation to define soul, to establish a once and for all theory of it, to make a school of soul experts, to program its study on models not inherently appropriate to it. Our best model is the poet, who may or may not speak explicitly about it. Our approach could be mythological, lyric, narrative, epic, comic, ironic, absurdist. We could be cautious in the genre of our speech about it, knowing that certain styles that are beautifully elegant for the mind and for fact are entirely inappropriate for the soul. Eternity in a moment. If the poetics of the soul is a stumbling block for educators in the modern setting, the notion of eternity is even more difficult. We live in a secularist society. The word secular refers to our age, our time, and place. We focus our attention more on what is happening now and on futurism that is equally literal. We imagine a future that has more and better of what we already know, and for the most part, that future is a material one. I have yet to hear of a futurist talk about how children will be fed, nurtured, brought up, and taught in profoundly fulfilling ways in the future. Eternity is not the same as afterlife. Eternity is now, if it is anything. Marsilio Ficino, who single-handedly did much to promote education for the soul in the 15th century and had an influence far beyond that, said that the soul exists in both eternity and time. The eternal is that which is beyond time, yet fully present. A beautiful object may stop time for a moment, allowing a moment of refreshing withdrawal from the pressures of the temporal. A brief period of contemplation, whether it is formal sitting and meditation or informal absorption in a child playing a few bars of music may take us out of time, and the soul increases in this moment. I use the word moment because the eternal is not limited or conditioned by time. A few seconds of reverie equals hours of hard work at the temporal level. Educators could keep in mind this principle as they develop a curriculum for the soul. It doesn't require grand new schemes of coursework and activities, but it may ask for attention to gardens, empty rooms, empty times, paintings, good sounds, a beautiful bell, anything that might foster a mere moment of contemplation. The soul has a spiritual dimension, and the eternal is certainly part of that spirituality. But it is never far removed from ordinary existence and from the material earth and the human body. The sound of the resonant bell doesn't just inspire the eternal, it is itself participation in the eternal, and its physicality is essential. The soul's spirituality is also as deep as it is high, and as diverse as it is intense. I picture the soul as a sphere surrounded by its eternal dimensions, its spirituality as rich, deep in its body as its periphery. Exquisitely unique. Talk of the soul is filled with paradox. Dreams teach us that eternal, archetypal, mythic themes lie at the base of our daily lives. We are always living a myth, being human and incarnating human potential. Soul writers favor mythology because it addresses these huge cosmic themes. But at the same time, nothing is more unique and momentary than the soul. As Cicero said, it is the animus, the daimonic and driven aspect of the soul that gives us our identity. Modern psychology favors the idea of an ego, a kind of self-sufficient, self-constructing identity, fully in our ken and control. But Cicero suggests something more in the line of the artist's ego, a sense of destiny and identity that rises up from passionate, uncontrolled, fate-filled dimensions of our entire existence. The ego is only a small portion of that volcanic power. Our idea of it reflects the shallowness of our very image of the human being, a mechanical ego lacking the profound vitality of a soul. Cicero hints at the mystery and paradox by which the great archetypal ground of human being gives birth to a remarkable individual person. Like artists who must be in touch with the inspiring muse aspect of being for their supply of images and familiarity with the mysteries, any person thrives through such a funneling of powerful forces and possibilities that draw fatefully into a personality and a life story. Therefore, in educating for the soul, the teacher will help the student meander in this paradoxical territory, a liminality, you might say, a capacity to stay on the border between the universal and the unique. We make a mistake when we reduce our psychological thinking to personal terms and dimensions. A person thrives from the great images as well as personal reflection. Our studies need not be made relevant to give them soul. And in fact, confusing soul for personality psychologizes in the worst way our efforts at education. There is a vast difference between allowing soul in the classroom and making learning a personal experience. A person's uniqueness comes from the soul, not from a focus on personal particulars and a delimiting of learning to what is personally relevant. That is the problem, too, with learning for skill and financial success. These may be relevant to the ego, but they obscure the needs of the soul. Vital and necessary eroticism. The great story of Eros and Psyche, ancient in its roots and loved by many modern psychologies, tells us allegorically that the soul needs Eros to work its way out of its primary narcissism, its concern for itself and its family, its literal and immediate roots. Orphic religion in Greece taught that Eros is a creative force, making worlds and keeping them alive. It is this terrifying profundity I have in mind when I say that educating for the soul is fundamentally erotic. As teachers and learners, we have to distinguish between what we think we need and what the soul desperately longs for. In therapy, I sit and watch as people struggle against the obvious and powerful desires that burn deep within them, but which seem to contradict what they consider best for themselves. Their healing would be the discovery of what the soul wants and the capacity to grant the soul its pleasure. Therapy is no more and no less than this, and neither is education. As everyone knows from experience, Eros is inevitably entangled with sexuality. In some ways, they overlap and are essentially the same, provided you imagine sexuality as an experience of the soul and mind as well as body. On the few occasions when I've addressed groups of educators on the theme of Eros, I have met strong resistance out of the fear, I believe, of sex. Education is a highly sexual activity. Intimate, physical, full of desire, involving a deeper tangle of souls than is usually admitted. It also involves the thrill of authority and power on both sides. It might help to remind ourselves how these power issues can turn into sadomasochistic patterns, where the sexuality in the power struggle comes more into the foreground. Eugene Ionesco's play, The Lesson, in which the teacher dominates and finally rapes his student, has always been instructive to me. In my studies of the Marquis de Sade, I also learned how sex and power, differences in age, and learning itself are all riddled with sexual colorings. Whether or not we invite Eros into education, it will be there. Better to cultivate it than to let it do its work outside any positive effort on our part to address it. I believe that the sexual demands in education can be satisfied through a more general attention to the erotics. Most Western education is highly Saturnine in tone. We like order, hierarchies, grades, tests, a gloried past, control, deprivation, remoteness of various kinds, and weighty seriousness. The Saturnine has its pleasures, and we do indeed take pleasure from giving and often taking tests and all the rest. The problem is really more of one of monotheism, the exclusive attention to Saturnine values, a focus that denies other legitimate pleasures. I often ask students to imagine a Venusian form of education. It might take place in lush gardens where the body feels tended and pleasured. Desire would be in the foreground, beauty everywhere. Of course, there would be venereal problems. Everything has its shadow. My point is to suggest a way to give Eros some range. Cosmetics in the school. If I had another lifetime like this one, I'd want to study the sacred art of the world as a way of learning life's mysteries. In the gesture and details of art, we glimpse truths about the nature of things. One of the most precious moments in my life took place when I was 50 and visiting Rome. I wandered the narrow streets by myself and visited the Museo Capitolino. in which I stood alone and quietly contemplated two sacred sculptures that have given my life meaning for many years: the Capitoline Venus and the Eros in Psyche. I wondered about Venus standing there naked with her hands in front of her breasts and some clothing and a vase beside her. She's often shown with a mirror rising from water, wearing bracelets and anklets, or in the unsurpassable paintings of Lucas Cranach, with brilliant jewels. Beauty, adornment, and cosmetics are all of great importance to the soul, even though they may seem secondary to an ego-centered life. Beauty arrests the attention, so the soul can come into view. It does little for practical life, but everything for that which makes human life meaningful and worth living. Shouldn't education be concerned with these issues, as well as understanding the physical world and getting along in it? Writers often note that the word cosmos means adornment, and conversely, we might say that cosmetics have a universal importance. Ficino said that sparkling sand and stone transmit the light they have absorbed from the brilliant stars. The cosmetic aspect of our experience similarly lets the mysterious light of the soul shine through, placing us at another liminal point between the eternal and the temporal. Educators sometimes reject plans to bring beauty into the learning environment as being merely cosmetic. From the soul viewpoint, instructed in the mysteries of Venus, we would not make such a judgment, but rather appreciate the importance of adornment in our schools, beauty in everything we do, and even the role of cosmetics for the body, an issue often discussed by school administrators, who are usually fearful of the Venusian soul. In practice, I can see that these few abbreviated reflections are really an outline for a book on educating for the soul. Each of these areas and many more need further development. The main point I want to make is that educating for the soul asks us for an entirely new set of concerns and values. These may be compatible with other goals we ordinarily bring into education, but they are radically different and demand a fundamental shift in thinking. As I've tried to show, when you focus on the soul, you necessarily turn some things upside down, as in the case of cosmetics. At the beginning, I referred briefly to education as a cultivation of a certain kind of ignorance, and not just an assault on the uninformed mind. As many religions teach, not knowing is as important as knowing. This may mean simply not striving to know everything, not testing to the limit, recognizing that everyone will have unique and precious pockets of ignorance. The soul can't be forced into education or into a life. It appears when there is an opening, and ignorance can be such an opening, provided it is allowed its necessity. Soul-oriented teachers need wisdom rather than information and a strong imagination. They have to be open to the deepest archetypal thrusts at work in human life, and also focused on the absolutely unique individuals in front of them. They, the soul teachers, have to think and speak in images and pay attention to beauty, nuance, and ritual. All school actions address the soul as well as the temporal and practical concerns. This is where a rule or custom turns into ritual, and a uniform or a classroom into an image. Soul teachers are never fully out of the realm of dream, for that is the natural environment of the soul. I don't mean they have to be dreamy in the usual sense, but always aware of the image and narrative that saturates their work. This is by no means an impossible expectation. We are all born to live poetically. We are created to serve the soul. This kind of education is natural and relatively easy. We need only get out of the way and let it happen. It does take work and circumspection not to be entirely deluded by the normative myth of the society, but that, too, isn't impossible. You educate for the soul by giving it things in life it needs: love, beauty, spirit, pleasure. You teach a person how to focus on the soul, how to live poetically and aesthetically, how to step into eternity. In this kind of education, time and eternity always intersect. One doesn't dominate the other. You aim towards the fullness of life and its empty spaces, and you avoid the tendency to be overly busy and literally void. You create the conditions and allow the soul to manifest itself. To accomplish this kind of learning, the teacher has to know what the soul is all about. Not definitions and theories, but concrete understanding of how the soul exists in ordinary life. This vision will draw soul into every subject, every field, and every learning activity. This will result in education not of the soul or about the soul, but for the soul.